Reeven normally flies under the radar, but their latest release, the Justice 2, is definitely worth a look. Howdy guys, Ponchato here, and today we'll be checking out the Reeven Justice 2 CPU cooler, which has a few unique features beyond your typical tower cooler. Thanks to Reeven for sending it over for review, and let's get started. The Justice 2 was released recently in July of 2019 for a low to mid-range price of $50 US. It's compatible with the usual modern sockets AM4, LGA1151, and LGA2066, and based on my testing, it can handle a TDP of about 160 watts. Its short height makes it very compatible with smaller cases since it measures only 155 millimeters tall. The other dimensions are 125 wide and 74 millimeters deep. Because the heatsink has a dual offset, it has both unlimited RAM clearance in front and stays completely clear of the first PCIe slot in case you have a thick graphics card. It comes in a pretty typical retail box with most specs and details on the side, along with a few pictures and diagrams of the Justice 2. Inside you'll find a box with the hardware and manual right on top. The manual is helpful and easy to read and has plenty of diagrams for the installation process. All the mounting hardware comes in one bag, and a pretty big syringe of thermal paste is included. Below that is the fan, which we'll go over in more detail in a bit, and finally at the bottom is the heatsink itself. The heatsink has a mostly normal design with 6 heat pipes, 6 millimeters in diameter, but does include a good-looking black top plate with Reeven stamped out of the center. The base plate is nicely machined and uses a proper plate rather than direct contact with the heat pipes. The fan is Reeven's newest Zephyros 2. It's 120 millimeters and equipped with 9 somewhat interesting blades. They have a unique design with small openings in the blades to potentially improve airflow. The fan speed runs from 300 to 1200 RPM, nothing out of the ordinary there, but it does utilize a fluid dynamic bearing, so it's rated for a 120,000 hour lifetime. The corners have rubber isolation pads, which should help keep system noise to a minimum. Though the Justice 2 only comes with one fan, it does include a second set of fan clips if you want to go with the push-pull setup. The installation procedure isn't too difficult, but it is more clunky than other coolers I've tested. It starts with putting keyed screws into the included base plate and adding washers to the other side of the screws. Then you slide the base plate screws through the motherboard mounting holes and add plastic spacers to the top side. These are also keyed, with one side having a slightly smaller diameter to fit into the gap between the screws and the motherboard mounting holes. Once those are on, the top plate rests on top of those spacers and it's held down with thumb screws at each corner. After that, add a small dab of thermal paste to the center of the processor and set the heatsink down on top. I ran into a slight inconvenience here. I couldn't slide the crossbar through the heatsink because the RAM was blocking it from the front. But with the RAM out, it went in place with no issues, except for another minor inconvenience. The cutout in the heatsink for the rear mounting screw wasn't quite large enough for my screwdriver handle to fit, so I had to get a longer screwdriver to mount the heatsink. With that though, you just alternate tightening down the crossbar screws so pressure is evenly distributed, and the last part is installing the fan. I put the clips on the fan first because those bent paperclip mounts are always really finicky, and then snap the fan onto the heatsink. The last step is plugging in the PWM fan header and it's good to go. And now let's go to the benchmarks. It's long overdue, but I'm switching my CPU cooler test bench to a higher power processor to stress coolers a little bit more. My test setup now uses a Ryzen 7 1700 at 3.8 GHz and features Team Group Vulkan Z memory, a passively cooled GT1030, and Seasonic 850 watt power supply. We'll start with the idle temperatures. The Justice 2's minimum speed of 300 RPM keeps idle temperatures at a reasonable 8.3 degrees above ambient, behind other coolers I've tested with equally low minimum speeds, but ahead of coolers which can stop their fans completely. Looking at idle noise, the Justice 2 is right in line with other coolers. Because of its low minimum RPM, it can run effectively silent at idle, and because it has a fluid dynamic bearing, there are no minor scraping or grinding sounds that you can get from cheaper bearings like sleeve or rifle. Now here are the load temperatures, with the coolers running at their maximum RPM. The Justice 2 comes in at 47.2 degrees Celsius, which translates to a load temperature of about 71 degrees. That's well within safe temperatures for a processor, but it falls behind other coolers I've tested on this setup. Now here are the load noise levels. The Justice 2 tops out at 1200 RPM, so maximum noise is a very reasonable 43.3 decibels. Just behind Scythe's Fuma 2, but well ahead of Noctua's NHU12A and Scythe's older Fuma Revision B. And finally, low delta normalized to 40 decibels. Again, the Justice 2 falls behind here at 48.8 degrees above ambient. That is still only about 73 degrees in absolute CPU temperature, which isn't bad at all for a processor drawing 140 watts, but it does fall behind the other coolers I've tested. So the Justice 2 looks nice and has great noise performance, but thermal performance isn't quite up to par. It was far enough behind that I actually ran the test a second time to see if I had installed it wrong or used too much or too little thermal paste, but the results were consistent. It cools decently, but not as much as a tower cooler this size should. In searching for the issue that could cause poor thermal performance like this, I believe I actually pinpointed the issue: mounting pressure, or lack thereof. Even after it's installed and fully tightened down, there's still a bit of play. The heatsink can rotate a noticeable amount. Every tower cooler has some wiggle room and can very slightly move, but this was more than normal. Because it has so much room to move, and relatively speaking, it's so easy to move, my bet is that the Justice 2's mounting system simply doesn't apply enough pressure between the heatsink and the CPU. And this could be an issue only with the AM4 socket, but mounting on LGA 1151 is almost identical, so I think this performance would persist across sockets. Now, all that said, the Justice 2 is still a significant step up over any stock cooler. Again, the actual temperature, not the delta, on my CPU pulling 140 watts was just over 70 degrees. That's a respectable temperature for that level of power, and noise performance on this cooler is also better than average, and again, would significantly outperform any stock cooler. So I'd recommend the Justice 2 primarily in situations where you're still using a stock cooler, you want good noise performance, and you like how this looks. Personally, I think it looks pretty good. Click the link in the description to pick one up for yourself. Hit subscribe and click that bell icon to get notified of new videos as soon as they're up. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe, and I want to hear from you. Do you use stock coolers, or do you always go aftermarket? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, I hope I helped, and I'll see you in the next video. It is a really cool looking fan though. Like these little cutouts right there. I actually expected those little cutouts to make the noise performance worse. I was thinking it would create like a rushing sound, but it's actually right in line with other 120mm fans that I've tested. Neat stuff. I like doing this.